time is really racing by, and we want to talk about the issues. I open to suggestions as to which one you would like to discuss right at the moment.
Well, there was an allusion there that I was just making innuendo, I think, on the question of this election thing. And again, I'm trying to impress the fact that what we're saying from fact. United States Senator Robert Griffin had the following comment on Nixon's report to the nation of April 7th, 1971. He said, "It was a sincere, credible, and courageous speech infusing new strength and character into the American spirit. In a practical sense, he did set a date certain for ending United States involvement, Election Day, 1972. Then later, Senator Scott said, in answer to a question, what about the date, Scott said he believed it would be before the end of 1972, adding that if the war drags on beyond that point, quote, another man may be standing on the platform when the next president is inaugurated in January 1973. So I think it's very clear that if the Senate whip and the Senate minority leader both have this opinion, that is not innuendo. The point is that there is a timetable. There is very definitely a timetable. But that timetable is not going to bring the prisoners of war home. As long as there is no negotiated settlement in this war, those prisoners will stay in Hanoi. And we have no bartering position because the president, on the other hand, has said that he is pulling the number of troops down. And each day that he pulls out more troops, he loses whatever bargaining position there is. Secondly, we are killing more Americans needlessly. If, in fact, we have stated that we do have a date certain, even if it hasn't been put out in front of the people, then some American is going to be killed and is going to be the last guy to die for an admitted mistake. Now, I don't think that's right.
That does seem to be a central issue here. There was an interview with, let me just state this, with some women last night on CBS whose husbands were over there, and they were saying, we of course supported the president because we're military wives and so on, but it's pretty hard now when people are back, when we're supposedly backing out of this war, to rationalize the fact that our husbands are still prisoners and that our sons are still dying.
I suggest it all comes in terms of an understanding of the issue, sir. We no longer obviously plan to win a military victory there. I think that all we've done is redefine or actually accomplish a reasonable definition of victory, which is giving the South Vietnamese the arms and tools to defend themselves. And I think that under the Vietnamization program, that's precisely and exactly what we've accomplished. I find it particularly remarkable that this gentleman, who is building his political career apparently upon the misery of all of us that serve there, for him to libel by innuendo the President of the United States and to suggest that he's keeping people there any longer than they have to be for political reasons. I think that's a particularly remarkable thing to have happen.
Well, Dick, I think that the question comes down to this, that really one could debate for a long time whether or not Vietnamization is working. As a matter of fact, just the other day, a United States colonel with 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, 9 Silver Stars, 9 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, who was the senior advisor to the airborne during the Cambodian invasion, who's commanded 2 combat battalions in Vietnam, who was the deputy assistant advisor in the Highlands, and who just completed 1 year as senior advisor in the Mekong Delta, threw away his career, quit the United States Army, saying that Vietnamization was a Madison Avenue man's dream. Now, I think that you could go on and on. The point is, I'm not trying to say conclusively that proves it's not working. One could debate that forever. The greater issue is this, that as long as the United States has some kind of troops in Vietnam, and it's been proven, and the President has not said all will come home, and the Secretary of State has said in his last press conference that we will have a residual force, as long as that residual force is in Southeast Asia, they will be attacked, they will be harassed, they will be mortared, there will be confrontation. And as long as there is confrontation, the United States of America will be called on to react. And we have not yet said what that reaction will be. Secondly, as long as you do not settle the political question of how the Vietnamese communists are going to fit into some kind of regime, as long as you continue the hypocrisy of saying that we are fighting for a democracy when you have a regime which only recently passed a law which may not let them have other candidates in an election, which has some 40,000 to 100 to 200,000 political prisoners in jail, which 10 days ago closed down 14 newspapers because they printed Key's speech about the corruption of the government. As long as we're supporting this kind of government and it doesn't allow representative forces to be part of it, you are asking for trouble. And that's what we're doing.
I suggest, Mr. Cavett.
You have to answer that after this message. We have a message. We'll be right back. Comes right now. We were talking about the hopes or lack of them for Vietnamization working.
I'd like to respond to what Mr. Kerry said. First of all, he quoted one colonel that suffers from the same problem as his organization did when the press covered 75 veterans out of 2.5 million of us. Obviously, you could talk to many thousands of other colonels who are serving in Vietnam that feel differently. That colonel happened to serve in the Mekong Delta. He managed one small area, province there. I can quote from the gentleman who runs the pacification program.
John, you didn't hear me correctly. I said he commanded 2 combat battalions.
He had a large amount of experience. At the present time, I understand he's in charge of a province, isn't he, in the Mekong?
But his overall experience doesn't count.
Yeah, well, this gentleman has been there for... No, I think it counts for a considerable amount, John, and I respect his opinion. It's just a shame the other 10,000 or so haven't appeared. This is the fellow, John Paul Vann, who's the director of that entire region. He's a civilian, used to be director until May 16th. He had this to say. He says that we're dealing with an enemy who's been actively engaging and attempting to impose his will upon the population for decades. The government control, however, of the Delta has gone from 3 million to 5.8 million. He says because of the Tet Offensive and so on that the population has shifted against the Viet Cong in that area. And I noticed the same thing from my own observations. Units like the Yumen 2nd Battalion, the To Chow Battalion, and so on no longer exist. They were formerly the prime Viet Cong units in the area. A second point I'd like to make is on political settlement. It seems to me that our position is the most unambiguous possible. Withdraw all North Vietnamese forces, withdraw all U.S. and allied forces, let the South Vietnamese themselves have a free election with almost anybody supervising it. The Swiss, the Swedes, the United Nations, anybody else. That's the legitimate way to incorporate other forces into the government. Finally, on a residual force, we're only going to keep a residual force there until our POWs are returned. If we immediately withdraw from Vietnam, as John suggested, it's a very serious situation either way. But if we immediately withdraw, what sort of a bargaining counter do we have? All the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese have said is that they'll negotiate with us if we totally withdraw. And we've been negotiating for 3 years or more in this country, and they're not the kind of people I don't think that you're going to get too far with.
I'd like to come back to that again. I keep making the point. Many people have made it. Clark Clifford, former Secretary of Defense, has made it. The newspapers have all made this point, that the prisoners of war, the question will be settled. It's not a question of negotiations. They have said it will be settled. Now, if we were to set a date for withdrawal from Southeast Asia, we can... The Vietnamese, first of all, have said it will be settled prior to the arrival of that date. But we can set a time limit on that. If the prisoners of war aren't back prior to the arrival of that date, then I think we would have, for the first time in all of our history of Vietnam, we would have a legitimate reason for taking some kind of reaction to it. The point is, we can set a date and they will be returned. A residual force is not going to return the prisoners if 500,000 people in the most devastating bombing in the history of warfare couldn't free them, or at least find a settlement in Southeast Asia. Secondly, to the question of Vietnamization, I keep saying, I'm not trying to prove it isn't going to work, and nor can it be proven that it can work. The question is it anything more than a military solution? Does it do anything more than continue a war? And that